Okay, hello, Dr. Jones. Thanks
Hello.
for joining me all the way in Dublin in Ireland. That's where I am at the moment.
Fantastic.
And so where are you based?
Well,
Tell
I'm in
us
the
a
East
little bit about
Midlands.
yourself and who you are.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. My name's Victoria Jones. I'm based in the East Midlands. So I ran my own dental practice for about 10 years in Nottingham until I sold it in 2017. So which was excellent timing given, all the traumas we've all been through in the last few years. Um, yeah, and I was an associate for 10 years before that. And I've worked for a number of different corporates, and I've worked for small practices. I've worked as, I've done all sorts, actually. I've had quite a range in my career.
So you're well-rounded. You're doing everything basically, have you?
Yeah, well, I never particularly liked being a dentist, but the thing is, once you've trained to be a dentist, it's a bit of a struggle to know what else to do instead. And of course, you graduate from university with so much debt, it's just like no other job's gonna help me pay this off. So, the only option is to just kind of keep going. But I was never 100% happy. So yeah, I've tried lots of different things. I worked for Boots when they were running their chain of practices that got bought out by Optical Express Dental Clinics. I worked for them as a regional clinical director. So I've seen lots of things at different levels all throughout the industry. So yeah, so it's an interesting experience, if nothing else.
Yeah, very, very, very good. Very, very good. So then how did you discover Bitcoin? How did you come across Bitcoin, and when did you discover it?
Well, basically what happened was, when having been through all of these different iterations as an associate, I finally decided that, I'd run out of options working for other people because I wasn't happy anywhere that I worked. So I decided that the only option was to kind of set up my own business and show them all how it was done. But of course, I tried to do that in December 2017. And so about 9 months in, I'd used up all my own savings, and it was time to go to the bank to ask for some more money. And of course, September 2008, no bank on the planet was lending money to anybody, which was a huge shock, because I remember when I went to university as a dentist, and all the dental students were saying, oh, the banks will love you, you never have any problem getting any money, blah, blah, blah. And so, I lived most of my career in this kind of happy bubble. If I ever needed to go to the bank, I'd get a new loan and then pay it off, and then get another loan and pay it off. And I had a financial advisor once, he said, every time I see you, you've paid off the last lot because you've got a whole lot of new ones. So, I was very proficient at how the banking system worked in terms of, releasing money into the public. So when it got to September 2008 and no one was going to lend me any money, and I really needed it, this wasn't just some fancy project. This was my livelihood. I'd also just had a baby, so that was kind of slowing things down a bit as well. And went to my local bank and said, I really need some money, and they're like, not my problem.
Yeah.
Never known anything like it. So so it was really stressful. So I spent about 2 years. The only way I managed to carry on was I paid for my business expenses using my personal credit cards. And so I got to the stage where, I'd used them all up. I was about 60 grand in debt on my credit cards, this small little business I'd opened. And there were weeks if something had gone wrong with the procedure I was doing on a patient, so that I hadn't been able to charge them that day, I'd have been bankrupt the next week. Really stressful. There are 3 occasions when that could have happened. And so, when I finally got through that, you just put blinkers on and just keep going, because you've got no other options. All other bridges have been burnt, because I knew I could be successful. I'd done it for other people. It's just the biggest problem was the finance. And because I was completely floored by that, it's not a problem that I'd expected. When I finally got to the other side, and I finally sold a house, because the other problem I had was I had a house that I needed to sell in order to move, to make my life easier. 7 years it took me, because I needed to sell it for a particular amount in order to pay off the mortgage and some of the other expenses I had. So, it was so incredibly stressful. By the time I got to the end of that, and I finally had some money that I could save, I was just like, right, this is really precious. What am I going to do with this? And so it was part of that research, because of course by then, the banks were only like 2012, 2013, well, it was 2015 actually that I sold the house. By then, the banks were only offering like 0.001% interest on savings. And I was like, well, this is really strange. As a kid, I remember going to the post office and getting 10%. My dad was really proud. He was, you know, march us all down to the post office for our savings in the post office because we'd get 10% interest. I mean, he was literally killing himself because the interest on his mortgage was so awful, but you know, he's encouraging all us kids to make the most of it with our savings. And so I clearly remembered that. And so it's like, well, why was it like that in the 80s and why is it like that now? And you know, that difference, it's not something that we're commonly told about. It's just something that, you know, we're taught to kind of expect and accept. And I was like, I'm not happy about this. So, you know, so that's one of the reasons why I started researching it. I wanted to know, you know, where was the best place to save my money. And the thing is, when I start these sorts of missions, I don't do it lightly. You know, when I want to know something, I really want to know. And so, you know, I dig deep. And so so eventually I came across the principles of sound money. The first things I bought were gold and silver, actually. So I bought some gold just before the Brexit vote in 2016. And then, of course, Brexit happened and the price of gold shot up overnight. And I thought, this is amazing. You know,
it's going up in value. It's going up in value.
Well, the thing is, I'd never really been an investor. I'd never really been interested in the stock market. I mean, I've got an uncle who dabbles in the stock market, but it was never really a strong part of my upbringing. So I didn't really know much about it. It was just the fact that I bought this gold and then the Brexit vote happened and I was like, wow, this is amazing. You're watching the price, the gold chart. But having run a business, you know, part of the principle, once I started learning about sound money, it was just like, well, running a business, you know, you're trading, you're giving someone your services for something that you accept in return. And so really you want to be paid with the thing that is the most valuable because you're offering your services and you want to be able to trade it for something that's useful. So, you know, so of course in the olden days we're all told about the barter system where people you know, would swap chickens or cows or whatever, but of course that was inefficient because it was hard to chop them up into smaller pieces and for them to still be useful. So of course the whole idea of money is that, you know, it helps to ease that transaction and make it more rewarding. And so of course, once I understood what was going on with our current system of money and the fact that it's constantly being devalued behind the scenes because of the amount of debt that's being created, I mean, it's a concept that's not really in our common day words. I mean, people talk about debt, but they don't really link it to how that affects us on the ground in terms of our money.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand it at all, really. And I only started really learning about it. And I've been in business for like, since I was 21, I started my first business. Now I'm 48. But it's only the last really 2 years when I had the time to start learning about it. I says, this doesn't make sense, man. You know what I mean? Like, this looks like a scam. That's what it looks like to me completely.
Well, you just don't know. I mean, I remember when I started investigating the whole thing, and I said to my sister, you know, she's got a master's degree. And I mean, I've got an MBA. I got that fairly early on in my career because I wanted to find a different direction. You know, and they didn't teach us anything about this. I mean, I have to say some of the economics lectures really opened my eyes. I mean, that really, you know, one of my biggest insights was the fact the NHS was a monopoly and of course how that affected prices and competition and things like that. But, you know, in terms of what money actually is, and even in the news, you kind of hear this constant conversation about the debt and it's just like, whatever, and you don't really realize how it's affecting you on the ground. And of course, so you've got these pound notes that say the Bank of England promises to pay the bearer on demand a sum of £20, but you know, what is that actual £20? And that £20 is constantly being affected by the amount of debt that's being created in the background. And you know, not many people understand that. And so this is what led me to the concept of sound money, which is like gold and silver. So before we had this current system of money, people would use metals in order to hold that level of exchange. But having run my own business, it was just like, well, you know, I've run a business and it's hard enough to get to the bank to deposit cash, let alone verify that someone's got a genuine gold coin and collecting those and it's heavy and taking it to the bank. It's just like, it's completely impractical. So, you know, we need a similar thing that's digital. And I'd kind of heard of this Bitcoin thing, but didn't really know much about it. And, you know, and I think I'd heard through 2013 and heard about it on BBC News and everyone was making lots of money from it. But I was just like, it just wasn't on my radar at all. I was busy with other things. But once I understood gold and I realized we needed a digital version, And then I realized that Bitcoin had been programmed to mirror the economic principles of gold. I was like, that's it. That's where we're going. So, well, may not be where we're going, but that's where I believe we should go. Because you've now got all of these other cryptocurrencies in the mix, which are trying to muddy the waters. And of course, because people don't understand sound money to begin with, they're easily distracted. So I kind of observed all of these things and decided that, I know lots of people kind of talk about these things, but I think sometimes different people saying it in a different way helps to get the message across. And there may be elements of the way, certain individuals understand it that may actually help and be part of the puzzle picture. And certainly, having built a business and been able to sell it very successfully, getting to the stage where I wasn't on the hamster wheel anymore, just trying to pay my bills, it kind of gave me the freedom, to really pursue something that I was passionate about. And considering how this affects all of our lives and how little people understand it, I was just like, this is it. This is what I want to do. So this is why I'm here talking to you. I recently gave a talk at a Bitcoin event, and I think your friend Daniel very kindly has been putting me in touch with a number of people who go, you need to talk to Victoria. I was like, yes, people need to hear what I have to say.
I'm going to put you in touch with a few people that I know as well.
Yeah.
And get you out there,
Well, absolutely.
And news about your book and helping people change their lives and really wake up to about sound money. That's what we're trying to do. And
absolutely, because people look around and they look at all of the problems in the world, and ultimately it all boils down to the corruption with the money. And it's the one thing that is never pointed out on the media, which feels, and it really irks me, because the thing is they present this image of the fact that they're trying to inform us and they're giving us the story. But once you understand what's going on, you realize they're only giving you part of the story. They're not giving you the whole story. And it's the fact that these parts of the story are missing that really bug me. It's just like, I need to do something about this.
So it looks like when you discovered Bitcoin and you started going down the rabbit hole and really learning about it and consuming it and all the knowledge about it, it really changed your life, didn't it?
It changed the way I looked at everything. And the trouble is, once you start learning about it, you learn about all sorts of other things that you didn't know before. So one of the things that I frequently talk about now that I think is also particularly related to dentistry is just like, well, how did we end up with the money system that we've got at the moment? And of course, at the end of the 1900s, Europe was incredibly prosperous. They'd all been working on a gold standard, and the reason why it broke is because of the expenses of World War I. Apparently, they wanted to keep the war going, and so they issued bonds in order to try and pay for it. But only a third of the bonds were sold, and so they were like, okay, well, what do we do now? Because we need to fight this war. And so they came up with this accounting trick in order to where they agreed that what they would do is they would temporarily suspend the amount of gold that was associated with the amount of notes in circulation, and by doing this they would pay for the other 2/3 that they needed to fund the war. And as part of this agreement, they agreed amongst themselves that whoever lost the war, they would bill for reparations in order to get them back on the gold standard. And so, of course, the part of the story we've always heard is that it was Germany who ended up with those reparations. But what we're never told is where those reparations came from in the first place. It's just like, well, Germany had to pay war reparations. It's just like, but why?
Yeah.
No one ever said that. And it's basically because of this accounting trick that they'd made. And of course, that's where it all started to go wrong, because of course Weimar Germany went into hyperinflation. That led to the rise of Hitler, which led to World War II, and in and amongst that you had the rise of the stock market crash of 1929, the roaring 20s, and then the Great Depression. And they will tell you, if you investigate it, they will tell you that it's to do with the fact that there wasn't enough money circulating in the economy. And so, of course, World War II got them out of the Great Depression because, the industry and stuff like that. But it goes further back than that. They wouldn't have had to do any of those things if they weren't on the gold standard. And the biggest political arguments at the beginning of the 20th century was all about getting us back on the gold standard. And you know, how many times have those little details been left out of our history lessons? I mean, I find it fascinating. So this is, you know, these are the things that I talk about in my presentations. So like, people need to know this, you know. And you know, the French Revolution, it began as a result of hyperinflation. You know, the revolution in Russia happened because Russia tried a similar trick with their currency, but because they were less stable, because they'd fought a war in 1905, so their finances were already fairly low. So they tried the same trick that Britain did, which was to, you know, undo the peg from the gold standard. But because they were less stable, they collapsed quicker, and that's what enabled the revolution of 1917. Because the general public, the point at which they get really, really upset is when, you know, their survival's on the line, and their survival is on the line when their money has been messed with. And it's been messed with, you know, the pivotal points in history are all related to when the money's been messed with. And so, you know, this isn't just about Bitcoin. This is about the fact that, you know, we're heading for some really significant changes in our society that are nothing to do with anything we've done. It's because of everything that's been manipulated behind the scenes. And unless we figure that out quick and use the tools that have been given to us to get out of that situation, we could be in really big trouble. So that's all part of my message.
It's starting to happen now as well, because I just really, today's the 12th of July. I was really reading there a few days ago that Indonesia just recently announced that they've gone bankrupt.
Yeah,
Indonesia,
Sri Lanka has.
Sri Lanka as well. They stormed the central bank over there, and the president fled Sri Lanka. It's all starting now. It hasn't hit the West yet, but it's coming, and it's going to come so fast that people need to protect themselves.
Yeah,
they need to protect themselves, and most people have their head buried in the sand. They look at Coronation Street and all these other things on the TV. They haven't got a clue what's coming. They need to learn.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the chats I was in recently, someone made a comment and they were going, I don't know what you lot are talking about. I can't see all this coming. And I'm saying, yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of people in 1900 who would have said exactly the same thing. Because you don't until it's too late. You know, if you're not paying attention, you know, this is the kind of thing that completely blindsides you. I mean, I was completely blindsided by 2008. I wasn't familiar enough with what was going on in the financial system to have any idea that that was on the horizon. And as a result, you know, I was primed to, you know, see some of these other things, you know, once I looked into it. And sometimes that's what's needed. What you need is a disaster to kind of make you go, hang on a minute, what's going on? And we've had several of those, but I'm not sure the message is entirely getting through. I think it is more and more, but you know, humans are very adaptable. I think they find their way to muddle through when things are against them, but when they don't realize that there are things stacked against them that are completely out of their control, it's been designed almost against them, really. And the only power they have is to understand what's going on and use the tools that have been given them as an escape route, which I believe Bitcoin absolutely is. But of course, Bitcoin gets trashed in the media so easily, and people get distracted by the fact that there are all of these other cryptocurrencies, which I think really, as I said earlier, you know, really colors the message. So again, I think that's why it's really important to be really clear in communication. It's just like, you know, Bitcoin might be an experiment, but all of these are like other experiments, you know, beyond Bitcoin. And
that can really be manipulated as well, because they've all got boards, they've got CEOs, they've got VC funding behind them. So they just sit around the table, make a decision, and it affects the whole community. And I know they might say it won't, but we've seen that already just recently with Celsius.
Yeah.
You know, they've been telling people different things, and like, thank God, I started seeing some red flags about Celsius, and a few of my colleagues and friends had their money on Celsius, and they took it off on the Thursday, and then on Sunday Celsius locked everything down.
Wow, that was lucky.
How did
you figure out that something was going on?
I just started following different people, and people that I know were putting red flags about what was happening. And I just felt it for weeks and weeks. And I told them, listen, guys, you need to get this off. You need to get it off. And on the Monday, I started screaming at them, guys, this thing's going to go down, or there's something going to happen here. Just take it off for the sake of it. Put it on a ledger, you know. And thank God they done that. And they done that. The last time done it on the Thursday, and then on the Sunday, bang. Sunday morning, we woke up. Monday morning, I think it was, they done it on Sunday evening, late evening, and the Monday morning, bang, it was announced all withdrawals were stopped.
It's so bad. And of course, all of these things give the whole space a bad reputation. And it's so common for the media to focus on the bad stories rather than, you know, what it's really all about, which is why it's so important that, you know, those who have studied it and understand it really talk about it and, you know, mention it to other people that we know on our networks, so that, you know, they get a handle on what some of the misinformation is. You know, because at least if they're getting the other side of the story, they've got places to go where they can really investigate the information and discover it for themselves.
Yeah, definitely. So where do you see Bitcoin going then in the future? And do you think it's going to change the world?
Well, I think the trouble is it's still new technology, and so people are still working on it at various levels. So at the moment, you've kind of got the main chain of Bitcoin, and what they're developing at the moment is a second layer in order to make the transactions easier. So of course, you know, one of the criticisms of Bitcoin at the moment is that it's slow and that it's expensive, but some of the second layer technologies are designed to try and overcome that. So part of the problem is at the moment we're kind of dependent on the exchanges so that people can get access to it. But really this part of the story is about the fact that people are learning about it, starting to get some in their own possession. But I think ultimately we need to reach a stage where we don't need the exchanges at all. And there are definitely people who are working on that. You know, the technology has been set up so that, you know, each individual and each business could run their own node and accept payments directly. You're not relying on a bank. You know, and by not relying on a bank, you solve a number of problems, which is like the bank's failing to pay you on time. You know, the government's deciding that, you know, they can bail in your account because the bank has failed. You know, there are all sorts of, the fact that we've become so dependent on banks is definitely a vulnerability in the system.
Definitely.
And so the benefit of Bitcoin is that all of that can run without that third party. And so there's a lot of debate about the fact that there's a lot of energy costs with Bitcoin, but actually if you compare that to how much it costs to run the banking system, it's kind of negligible really. And it's just like, well, we're going to have to spend some energy somewhere, so why not spend it where it's more efficient? So I think the more you look into it, the more you understand, you know, how brilliant the technology is. And I think ultimately people will be driven towards it as a result of their own self-interest. But because of all the distractions, you know, the longer it takes you to figure that out, the worse off you'll be. I think it really is worth understanding what this is sooner rather than later, so that you have a chance, you know, to own it when it's cheaper. You know, I think the earlier you get it, the better off you'll be really. And if you're not comfortable, you know, putting a large chunk of your wealth into it, you know, just start off with a little bit, learn how the technology works, because I think there's no doubt about it. You know, Bitcoin is the backbone for a lot of the crypto industry. And if you're going to learn about anything, you know, learn about that first, get hold of a bit of it, just see how it works. And just by doing that, you'll start to see the beauty of it. You know, I was at an event, like I said, last weekend where I was selling my books and I just had a Lightning wallet on my phone. And so, you know, because it was a Bitcoin event, other people had, you know, some Bitcoin on their phone. And so they were paying me for my book with Lightning, and it was just happening, you know, instantaneously, and it was just amazing. And some, you know, one person brought their dad, and he'd got his dad to have a Lightning wallet, and he was like, well, you know, shall I pay with my card? And it's like, just pay with your Lightning wallet, Dad, see how it works. So it was an opportunity for them to see how it worked. And so when it's working, it's great. But you know, I've tried setting up my own node and my own Lightning node, and it's still quite tricky. It's not particularly user friendly. So some of the existing wallets are quite good, but you pay a fee to use all of those. And even, you know, running one yourself, there are costs involved because, of course, you know, helping to support the network. But again, it's a fine balance. It's about, you know, which is more cost effective. And ultimately, in a free market, which is what we're aiming for, you know, the best solution wins. So
yeah. And I think as more people get into the network as well, it's going to make it more easier and more user friendly, and more companies going to get involved with more technology. That's what's going to help grow the whole network, isn't it? Grow Bitcoin as well. Because as we know, there's probably only about maybe 200 or 300 million people that really maybe understand and know about Bitcoin. What's going to happen when 1 billion people know about it, and then 2 billion people?
Yeah, I mean, some of the smartest people on the planet are now involved in this technology because, you know, they understand exactly what it's designed to achieve and the problems that it's designed to solve. And I think as smarter and smarter people kind of get involved, you know, the stronger it becomes, you know, the more that people are keeping on the network to make sure there's no corrupt computer code that's, you know, going into it. And because all of the software is open source, so anyone who's a computer programmer is able to look at it and understand it, and it's hard to change the network unless you've got a consensus agreement on it. So, you know, so changing the network is going to get harder and harder over time. So, you know, from what I can tell, everything's moving in the right direction. I mean, obviously, it's difficult to know 100% for sure exactly how it's going to work out. I mean, I still own a little bit of gold and silver, but mainly as a hedge against Bitcoin failing. But, you know, considering I bought some gold and silver in 2016 and then I bought some Bitcoin, I mean, Bitcoin's been by far the better investment.
Hundreds of percent more.
Exactly.
Increased in value, hasn't it?
If I'd known, but, you know, buying the gold and silver was all part of my learning process, because of course, you know, learning about that taught me about, you know, how money used to work and how money is currently corrupted. So yeah, but, you know, our world has now evolved to something digital, but we now have a choice. So we're going to choose something that supports our freedom or something that supports our enslavement, because it would appear the way things are going that everything's kind of conditioned to get us into this box that it's very difficult to move out of. So we do have a different option here, but it relies very heavily on people being educated. You know, at the moment, there's a lot of talk about governments regulating cryptocurrencies, but ultimately, if you understand how Bitcoin works, Bitcoin regulates the governments. It stops them from spending too much money and from being corrupt. You know, if they decide that they want to fund another world war, they can't just create money out of thin air if the public don't agree, or the public won't fund it in order to continue with that kind of campaign. And so, you know, having something like a sound money stops a lot of those things in their tracks and makes things a lot fairer for people on the ground. But unfortunately, a lot of people are so conditioned to believe that we need the governments in order to have a safe and secure society. I'm not saying that governments have no role at all, but I think maybe their role has been rather overextended. And I think there are a lot of people who are very unhappy with how things are currently panning out in our political sphere right now. So yeah.
They should really be working for the people and helping the people. But a lot of the times when you start diving in and looking at exactly what they're doing, they're actually working against the people. But a lot of the policies that they bring in and all of the stuff that they bring in and their rules and their laws, it's enslaving people. But most people don't get it. They don't even see that.
No, they don't. And most people don't even want to think about it. You know, it's just kind of like politics. Oh, it's not my thing. But actually it affects all of us. And politics and money, the way it currently works, is intimately tied to government. And so, you know, they've got strong incentives to stay in power and to dismiss anything that may disrupt that power. But I think, you know, it's high time all of us really took a good look at what was going on and asked if this is actually what we really want for our future, because certainly from what I've investigated, I don't think we're headed down a very enlightened path right now. I think it could be a lot better.
Yeah, because especially with these new things that they're talking to CBDC, if the government, and not if, probably when, they transition from the money that we have now to these central bank digital currencies, it's programmable money that they're going to introduce to people, and it's going to be total control. And not a lot of people don't even really understand it, or want to understand it, but it's coming, and people need to wake up and protect themselves.
Yeah.
I think programmable money, imagine that they can stop you buying petrol at a certain time or the amount. If they want to stop people buying alcohol after 6 o'clock in the evening, they just turn it off and nobody can buy alcohol across the whole of the UK or Ireland or Europe. People don't understand.
Vaccinated, you can't go in the supermarket.
You can't go anywhere. Nothing.
Exactly. Get on a flight, forget it. So I mean, even the Canadians, you know, they still can't leave the country because of their, you know, vaccination policies. So yeah, I mean, people wake up and smell the coffee before it's too late. So yeah.
Perfect. And then regarding your book, explain to us a little bit about your book. Tell me about your book and what exactly is involved in it, and why should dentists and everybody read it, basically. Show us it there.
This is my book. It's called Truth Decay, How Bitcoin Fixes This. So I wrote this in the autumn of 2019 and published it in March of 2020, which was really good timing from a marketing point of view. Literally no one was thinking about anything apart from COVID then. But the whole idea of the book was, like I said, you know, I mean, because I wrote it, there are a lot more people talking about Bitcoin now, and there are lots of various YouTube channels and stuff like that. But like I say, I think everyone's kind of got their own perspective on it. I felt that there's a lot of people who are into computers or purely into economics who talk about Bitcoin, especially a lot of trading. You go onto YouTube, a lot of people talking about trading and that aspect of it. But I was particularly interested in it from a business perspective, as having run a business myself. It was wanting, you know, this aspect of trading, this aspect of, you know, offering your services and getting something in return that is actually valuable, that will hold its value. You know, ultimately, this is the way in which I believe we should be trading in the world. And so I actually went through a phase of actually accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment in my business. And so the book is it's split into 3 parts. The first part is my story as a dentist and how I became interested in Bitcoin in the first place, and, you know, some of the basics of Bitcoin in the first section. The middle section is my experiences as a dental business owner, actually accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment. And then the third section is about the future and how I see Bitcoin developing and how I believe that could have an influence on the world. So it's not that long. It takes about 3 hours to read it from start to finish. But I think if you don't know, it's written as an introduction. You know, there are more high-level books that will go into it in more detail. But if you don't know anything about it at all, it's written more like a story. So it's designed to be interesting and digestible. And so it's just a way of kind of introducing you to the subject, really, and particularly introducing you to some of the implications of, you know, how our money has worked in the past, how it's maybe harmed us in the past, and how, you know, those things could harm us or help us in the future. So that's what it's designed to do. And certainly people who've not been introduced to any of these ideas at all, they've found it really enlightening. I've got some mostly nice comments on Amazon regarding it, so you can have a look at those if you're not sure before you get a copy. Yeah.
So they can get it from Amazon. And where else can they get it from? Anywhere else?
I've got a website called satoshispage.com. So there, if you were already into this and you just want to get a signed hard copy and you're prepared to pay in Bitcoin for it, you can get that from my website. So, and also my website kind of demonstrates how it's possible to kind of accept payments without using a third party, using the Bitcoin network. So that's worth checking out as well. And I've got a newsletter on there. I don't do it particularly often, every few months or so, if I think there's an important topic. If I've prepared a speech recently, you know, I might then turn that into a newsletter, just to, because if I've picked up some interesting things, I think it's worth passing on. Sometimes I use it on there. So yeah, it's more of a hobby thing at the moment, but, you know, that's my take on the subject. And so anyone who's interested and wants an easy introduction, certainly that's what I'd recommend.
Sounds amazing. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to drop the link for your book and your website in the bio there for this video, and then we can hopefully drive some traffic towards your book, and some people might get to learn a little bit more and get a bit more educated.
Brilliant.
On your amazing story and read that book. I'm definitely going to read it anyway. I'm going to get on Audible.
Okay,
because I like driving and listening to all these books. So definitely.
Oh,
that's
fantastic.
on my list anyway.
Oh.
So thanks for joining us today. Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
And it was amazing. And we'll definitely get you to talk to a few more people around the world about your book and your journey in life. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Perfect.